that your scripted facade of reality that America's government and agencies, that people always say the alphabet agencies, are the good guys. We're the good guys. And I'm not talking about the American people. I'm talking about the people that are in positions of power, diplomacy, drafting policy. They have billions of dollars that is not their own, that comes in through taxpayer money, and they do whatever they want with very little oversight, lots of game playing. And one of the things that they have done goes against every set of ethics you could ever possibly fathom. And I don't want to get into all the violations that have ever existed with our government, but there are examples that could be cited when people did things that were wrong, plain wrong. And so I want to introduce you to the Rebecca Roth woman who she's a researcher, is what she is. And she has a lot of interesting information about 9/11 and about what really happened with that stuff. And I've listened to quite a bit of what she has to say. She has some books. I haven't read them rather, but they would probably be really good books. I've listened to so many interviews with her, though. I feel like I have a really good base of understanding. And she's kind of just delving in to this unending sea of just evil, debauchery, ethics violations like you wouldn't believe. That is a little on the blurry side, but it's basically another one of these underhanded CIA experiments where people did evil things, mainly for, that's just gross, mainly for discovery purposes on how people would react when given various elements like that. Can you imagine having that ingested into your system and not knowing, and you're just going along normal, and then all of a sudden things get weird? So anyhow, this was back in the 50s, when we thought people were sweet and innocent and stuff. And you can see that the CIA had rented some apartments in New York City, and there was a set up bar and quarters for entertainment while the other apartment is being used by the CIA for the purpose of taking motion pictures. Creepy. Through an X-ray mirror, like a two-way mirror of the activities in the former apartment. So drugging people without their knowledge and then observing their behavior, in other words. So it's one thing if you want. Look at this. If you want that sort of thing and you take that into your body, which opens doors to demons, by the way. So I don't recommend it. But nonetheless, I mean, when you know that you're taking a substance into your body, it's a completely different scenario than when somebody slips you a Mickey or whatever and you don't know about it. It's really evil. This is our government. These are the people that are in charge of DARPA and HARP and DO, directed energy weapons, and many other things. These are not nice people. You have to understand. So they want to know how to elicit mind control on people. Yeah, these were supposedly safe houses, right? With friends. Gross. And bring back Johns, and the CIA would that. Gross. So let's listen. This is Project MK Ultra, the CIA, and you. You're honest government at work.
II, the Soviet Union was an ally of the United States. But as soon as the war ended, they flipped the switch on the Soviet Union, and they decided that the communists then were the new enemy, much like they've done with the Mujahideen, turning them into Al-Qaeda and then ISIS. So we create the enemy, and then we create a war with the enemy, and that's kind of what the Cold War was all about. So they did this. This was just, it's mind-blowing when you read the books about it. The program actually involved more than 150 human experiments involving psychedelic drugs, paralytics, and electroshock therapy. Sometimes the test subjects knew that they were participating in a study, but at other times they had no idea. And they were given hallucinogenic drugs, magic mushrooms, ecstasy, LSD, etc., without knowing that. So this is just, you're thinking now, what? Seriously? I could be at a cafe and then somebody drinking a latte and all of a sudden be on an LSD trip? Yeah, you could have been, had you been in Paris. They actually did this in Paris. It's mind-blowing. Many of the tests were conducted, just like one of the things I found out about many of the people that were involved on that September morning were also part of universities. So many of the tests were conducted at universities, hospitals, and even prisons in the United States and Canada. Yes, indeed. In Montreal, there was a big organization set up there to do this kind of experimentation for the Central Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C., Langley, Virginia. Most of these took place between 1953 and 1964, but that's just because they don't want you to know it's still going on. It's just like the other things we don't know about, like we didn't know 20 years ago about directed energy weapons, for example. So when we see something happen like the towers blow up, you just think, well, how did that happen? But if you know that there's actually weaponry that could do something like that, then you see, you look like a crazy person if you're talking about something nobody knows anything about, right?
Well, I was in high school towards the end of that, in the early 70s, and that's when LSD really burst on the scene, and it became an issue with everybody. And in looking back at that, you think, well, where did that really come from? How did that really happen? Because they didn't really talk about it at the time. But now it's pretty obvious where it came from and how it got ingratiated into the lives of high school students, college students, and other people in that particular area.
Exactly. The CIA began to experiment with LSD under the direction of the CIA agency's chemist named Sidney Gottlieb. He was a chemist and a poison expert. He literally traveled around the world through Africa, South America, Central America, and looking for hallucinogenics or drugs that could control your mind or make your mind go out of control. And their goal was mind control. This is really fascinating because it gets really in depth and it brings back, we're going to talk more about the Manchurian Candidate. It is both of the movies. There was a newer version too. So I would suggest you watch them both, but the original is excellent too. But this all will make sense to you after you listen to this show and then watch the Manchurian Candidate movies, because this is what the Central Intelligence Agency was all about. And this Sidney Gottlieb doctor, chemist, was dead set to figure out how to get ahead of all the other countries to use drugs and to harness different chemicals into mind-altering brainwashing and psychological torture. The Central Intelligence Agency. With those words, you think about that and you think, if you're out there thinking, oh no government agency would do what we saw that September morning, now would they? What did I just say?
Well, what was really upsetting is to Sidney Gottlieb, absolutely nothing was off limits. He could do and think and operate any way he wanted to.
Oh, wow. No
Well,
boundaries.
under the auspices of this Project MK Ultra, the CIA began to fund studies Oh. At Columbia University, Stanford, and other colleges on the effects of this drug, LSD. After a series of tests, the drug was deemed to be too unpredictable for use in counterintelligence. But the MK Ultra program also did include experimentation with ecstasy, mescaline, heroin, barbiturates, methamphetamine, speed, psilocybin magic mushrooms, and more. And one of the things that they also did was during this time, they had an operation called Operation Midnight Climax. Wow, that's a good name for a movie. Operation Midnight Climax was an MK Ultra project in which the government employed prostitutes who lured unsuspecting men to CIA safe houses. Yeah, CIA rented these safe houses. And then they hired the prostitutes to bring unsuspecting men into these safe houses where drug experiments would take place. The CIA dosed the men with LSD, and then while at times drinking cocktails behind a two-way mirror, they would watch the drug's effect on the men's behavior. Recording devices were installed in the prostitutes' rooms and disguised as electrical outlets. So they monitored this. Most of the Operation Midnight Climax experiments took place in San Francisco, Marin County, California, New York City. The program, they also did this in Germany. The program had little oversight, and the CIA agents involved admitted that a freewheeling party-like atmosphere prevailed. An agent by the name of George White wrote to Gottlieb in 1971 saying, "Of course, I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal and deceive, rape and pillage with the sanction and the blessing of the all-highest U.S. government?" Now, this whole MK Ultra program involves also an agent, CIA, who worked for the CIA, who was a biochemist named Frank Olson. And you guys can look this guy up if you're not familiar with this story. In 1953, at a CIA retreat, Frank Olson was given a cocktail that had been secretly spiked with LSD.
Oh.
A few days later, in November of 1953, Olson tumbled to his death from the 10th story window of a New York hotel room. Now, he lived in Virginia, so what was he doing in New York? Well, the CIA feared that what he saw went on a trip to Germany when he witnessed Operation Midnight Climax type activities and worse. That an MI6 British chemist agent for the CIA working with alongside of them thought that he might break and that he might spill the beans about what horrific experiments the CIA and the MI6 were doing in Germany.
Well, I find it really interesting that the MI6 was once again obviously working with the CIA and that they were giving information to them and they were acting upon that information that the MI6 gave them. Geez, where have I heard that story before?
Just, that sounds like the Russia hoax against Donald Trump.
Well, it basically sounds like what happened during that horrible day in September.
That too.
That
I don't support Donald. She needs to do her research on Donald next.
was before 10 and after 10.
It's an amazing thing when you start to see all these parallels, and it's just fascinating. Well, one of the books I recently read was about Frank Olson's son searching for the truth, and they did actually admit that the CIA murdered him. But it's interesting, too, that at the time of the body being exhumed, the body of Frank Olson being exhumed from the grave, and another autopsy done on him, or maybe this was the first one because the CIA buried him right away. They found out that he had not actually died from falling or jumping from his 10th story window, but indeed from a blow to the temple, in which George White always bragged about. Now, there's something else you guys can do an internet search